XOs, 26F, ex-fiancé took his life after he found out about me, 28M, and blamed my so for everything. She is devastated and is beating herself up really bad about it. Pretty much my so was in a relationship with her ex-fiancé for almost 8 years. She relocated for work about 3 years ago, and he had a bunch of issues getting a visa to work in the US. So they had been in LDR for a few years. They broke up about a year ago. The gist of it was he wanted her to move back home due to COVID, and being able to work remotely. She did not want to move back home, and I don't know everything, but it caused them to break up. I met my so over a year and a half ago through work. Originally it was more or less platonic, but after they broke up we started spending a lot more time together. Eventually we started dating about 6 months ago, and since with COVID we have pretty much been living with each other for the last few months. We get along great and we had already started talking about moving in together because everything was going so well. 2 weeks ago he apparently found out about us somehow, and stuff kind of went crazy. She started getting phone calls from him from all sorts of random numbers, basically begging her to talk to him. He sent emails from tons of different addresses, tried to message her on everything. Eventually she wrote a long email pretty much explaining that she is happy and she wants nothing to do with him ever again, and some other things. It stopped after that, until this weekend on Friday when we were in bed. It started up again. She ended up just turning her phone off on my suggestion and we went to bed. On Saturday she found out from her parents that her ex had taken his life that night. She had a ton of missed calls, and messages pretty much saying what is about to happen. One of her old friends also sent screen caps of the post her ex had made where he said a lot of awful things about her, and a lot of untrue things. Since then she has been beating herself up bad. She asked me to stay with her until Monday where she said she wanted a night alone. Today I saw her and brought her favorite food, and she is a mess. She is beating herself up over this. I suggested talking to a mental health professional, but considering our city is flooded with COVID, the odds are she is not going to get much support in the short term. To make matters even worse, she has gotten a bunch of hate from friends/relatives of his on Facebook over this. I don't know what I am supposed to do, aside from being supportive. Too long didn't read. Ex-fiancé took his life, blamed my so for everything. She is hurting and I am clueless. Thanks for your help/suggestions/well wishes. She was able to get a referral for someone through work, and is going to start seeing a therapist through Zoom for now. I am just going to be as supportive as I can. If you're in the US, she can also call 7 Cups or NAMI's helpline for someone to talk to more quickly. Suspect she could also connect with a grief support group pretty quickly. I hope she is blocking any asshole who has the audacity to harass and blame her. This is terrible. I'm so sorry you're both going through this. The hard thing for you to accept is that being supportive is all you can do. She's the one who's got to do the work of processing and coming to terms with what happened. It's hard to do and hard to watch. Best wishes to you both. Thanks. I will suggest her 7 Cups and NAMI. I didn't know about those at all. She has been blocking everyone as far as I know. Thank you for the advice and well wishes. Many therapists are doing sessions over Zoom now. There is definitely help available. Yeah, I am going to suggest that tomorrow. Apparently our work has some sort of mental health specialist who supports the entire company, and worst case I think they might be able to give a recommendation. My thoughts: if he blamed her for the suicide, he most likely killed himself to hurt her, not because she didn't want him. I think she needs professional help to help her see that this isn't her fault. If it wasn't her, it could be someone or something else that he'd blame it on. I am suicidal. In my lovest, I hated my stepdad so much. I wanted to hurt him since I felt he didn't care about me, started arguments and talked behind my back. My plan was to off myself where he worked, so the first thing he saw was my body when he got there. My mom sensed something was up that day and stopped me on my way there. I had one of house 2 birds with 1 stone in my mind. I got help BTW and doing a lot better. Please just be supportive. Her ex was mentally unwell. They were no longer together. This was not her responsibility. Thanks. I am trying to be as supportive as possible and give her whatever she needs. It just kind of frustrates me that I feel powerless to do anything. My sister took her life after a relationship breakup. She texted him her plan and he saw the message and didn't do anything besides saying please don't. I don't blame him at all for her death, she made her choice. Her disproportionate reaction was not his responsibility. I'm so sorry you and your so are dealing with this mess. It's not her fault. She'll probably be affected by this for a long time though. Seeing a bereavement psychologist to help her manage this grief would be a really good thing to do. As you suggested, getting on a waitlist now will mean she will have some professional support in the future. It's never too late. For now, continuing to be understanding and letting her express her emotions is probably the best you can do, as well as practical support like providing food and helping with housework if you can. Keep reassuring her that it isn't her fault but it's still okay and normal for her to feel however she is feeling. Being with her or giving her space as she needs is good, though if she withdraws and doesn't want to see you for days, perhaps making sure a friend or family member looks in on her would be helpful. Perhaps turning her Facebook to private or suspending her account for a while might be a good idea so she doesn't have to deal with the, frankly awful, unfair, nasty messages from his family. My 30th husband, 30M, had an emotional affair and I am struggling to move on. My husband and I were together for several years before getting married, and I genuinely believed our relationship was built on a solid foundation of friendship and love. He was my best friend and I really couldn't see myself being without him for the rest of my life. When I fell pregnant, we were nervous but excited. I was told by several doctors that I couldn't conceive naturally, so getting pregnant was a huge deal for me. And I had thought it was the same for my husband. But towards the end of my pregnancy, my husband started becoming withdrawn. He had just started a new job that worked long hours, and I was aware it was stressful for him in a COVID environment, so I tried to make it easy for him and give him space and lessen the burden that this pregnancy appeared to be giving him. After a few weeks on the new job, he became good friends with a female coworker. He would briefly mention her here and there in our conversations when I asked him about work, and I didn't give it much thought. We've always had friends of the opposite sex and we both trust each other to keep things appropriate. In my final month of pregnancy, the text messages began. From the second he stepped through the door, his phone would constantly go off. Literally every 5 seconds, he would get a notification. He would brush it off as work-related messages, and I had no reason to doubt him. He never hid his phone or acted suspiciously, but he always responded immediately to each text, often smiling as he did so. As a result, I was largely ignored at home while he stared at his phone screen throughout the night. Checking his messages was the first thing he did when he woke up and the last thing he did before he fell asleep. Whenever I tried to engage him in conversation, he'd give me a grunt of acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving the screen, his fingers replying to the latest message. There were a few times he would share something funny on his phone with me, and I would see these notifications popping up in real time. Always from his female coworker, always a message that didn't sound work-related. I never invaded his privacy and looked through his phone, but I didn't need to. Any messages I saw popping up were filled with cutesy nicknames and references to personal things. He'd quickly swipe away these notifications and pretend they weren't there, but as soon as I moved away, he'd go back to respond. When I gave birth, my husband took 2 weeks off to look after me, and he was great. He made sure I was fed, took care of all the chores, helped out with the baby whenever I needed some rest. But as soon as he had any downtime, he'd be right back on his phone. The messages never stopped. As our baby boy grew and he achieved his mini milestones, I would always delight in sharing these moments with my husband. But anytime I pointed out something cute or new, the first thing he did was take a photo and send it to his coworker, continuing on with their conversation which was clearly no longer work-related. Over Christmas, I told my husband that I was really looking forward to relaxing at home, just the two of us and the baby. I was exhausted looking after our son by myself all day every day, and couldn't wait to get some proper rest. But my husband insisted on inviting his coworker to our house for Christmas, and I was expected to cook for her and entertain her. That was the tipping point. 4 months of neglect that I had bottled up inside just exploded out. I told him how miserable he made me each night, how he had sidelined me for someone else, how he lavished attention to his coworker and barely gave me the time of day. I told him that he was having an emotional affair and I couldn't stand it anymore. To his credit, my husband was apologetic about the neglect, but he refused to admit that it was an emotional affair. Yes, he talked about personal things, yes, he constantly messaged her, yes, he shared his happiness and frustrations with her, but no, it wasn't an affair. He didn't have any physical feelings for this person, therefore I shouldn't be labeling it as an affair. And how dare I accuse him of such things? He refused to continue the conversation, and it became a long drawn-out week of silence. I cried myself to sleep every night, wondering why I wasn't good enough that my husband would find emotional comfort with someone else. Eventually he opened up after I begged him to tell me why he found me so lacking that he chose to actively ignore me. His reason was that his coworker was fun to talk to, she gave him positive reinforcement all the time. In contrast, all I gave him was negativity and stress with the baby. He admitted that he watched me do pretty much all the work with the baby, and it was just easier to lose himself with someone else than to deal with the guilt of letting me raise our child by myself. I was heartbroken. Here was my best friend of almost a decade telling me that he didn't want to be there for the bad times, only the good. That I was a weight dragging him down. It's been almost a month and I'm still struggling to come to terms with it. I alternate between being angry and sad, almost always crying myself to sleep. I feel miserable, alone, unwanted and just so exhausted. I can see my husband trying to make amends. He's stopped texting her around me, but refused to set boundaries with his coworker for fear of creating a bad working relationship. He gives me a little more attention each day but it feels so forced. His moments of affection are guilt-ridden, and conversation is stilted. He doesn't want to talk about this anymore, so I will never get the closure I need. He's suggested therapy for me, but it's not something we can afford. If we keep going like this, divorce will become inevitable. I may just be overreacting to a small situation, but I can't stop feeling so horrible all the time. I'm so unhappy when he's around, but just as unhappy when he's not. Please Reddit, how can I get over this emotional hurdle and move on? /edit. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to comment and leave a message. I haven't had a chance to reply to most people, but I promise that I have read every single one. I really appreciate the kindness, the words of encouragement, and the experiences and advice everyone has shared with me. To follow up on some of the common questions and themes. Why didn't I tell him sooner that it was bothering me? In the first month, I really didn't give it much thought. My husband's industry is notorious for having horrible work-life balance, so to have a constant stream of dialogue from people at work didn't seem out of the ordinary. Yes, he started ignoring me, but he's settling down in a new job. I could justify it somewhat. In the second month, it started to bother me. It was around this time that I noticed it was just one person who was constantly messaging him. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to come across as being untrusting and demanding. I've dated jealous control freaks before, and I vowed never to be like them. By the third and fourth month, it had really cemented in for me that he was actively ignoring me for his female co-worker. It was around this time that the messages became overly personal, and the frequency became so ridiculous that he'd have gone to sleep, and the notifications would still keep going, waking up the baby. I tried to start a conversation on this multiple times, but every time he'd dismiss me with a one-word answer and go back to looking at his phone. Things like "I think you're spending too much time on your phone" would be replied with "yup" and nothing more. After a while, I just gave up. I already had very little energy left in the day. Why spend it talking to a brick wall? Am I actually being negative all the time? This was one of the things that hurt me the most. "You were negative and stressful" were literally the words he said to me. When I asked him to explain, it was broken down into two parts. Before the baby, I worked in a pretty entertaining place. I'd often come home with funny stories and anecdotes, and even when venting about a horrible day, it would make us giggle at the end at how common sense was just not common. When I went on maternity leave, my entire day revolved around the baby, and suddenly my stories at the end of the day were he vomited and he pooped everywhere and he didn't have his nap, so now he's extra cranky. To him, I stopped being fun and started being negative. It's not that I deliberately shared only bad things, but our baby is no angel and I can only share what I experience. The stress is a result of his guilt. He feels guilty that I let him sleep through the night so he's alert for work, leaving me sleep deprived every day. He feels guilty that I am so patient with the baby, when he can't stand more than 10 minutes of crying. He feels guilty that I'm doing so much each day by myself that I only get time to eat one proper meal. And all of this culminates to stress from being aware of his own shortcomings. But rather than dealing with these internal emotions, he chose to punish me for it because he knew I cared enough about him that I'd be forgiving in the end. I baby trapped him and that's why he ran to someone else. That's just not true. He was the one who really wanted to have a child. I could have lived a life with or without children. I knew children were hard work, especially for the mother, but kids were important to him, and I was willing to put in the work. But it turns out that he wasn't prepared for how difficult things could be, and so he escaped to his conversations with his coworker. Would it bother me as much if it was a male coworker? Yes, it would. My biggest issue was that I was being ignored for someone else. If he was working on a project that demanded all his free time, that would be completely different. I would understand and support him. And I have in the past. But he was free to be a husband and father whenever he came home, and he chose not to be. This wasn't a conversation between two good work friends venting about their day, blowing off steam. He's done that before, and at the end of each conversation, he'd shut off the phone and get back to home life. This was different. It was continuous, it was deep, and it took every single ounce of his attention so that the baby and I were left with nothing. The female part didn't come into play until the end, when I saw that the messages became overly personal and an extra boundary had been crossed. Look through his messages. I don't need to, it can only be worse than what I've already seen in the notifications. Why subject myself to that? Confront the female coworker. I've always believed in not blaming the third wheel. Yes, she constantly messages a married man, calls him her other half, talks about personal things, but if my husband hasn't set any boundaries, how does she know she's crossed any? Why come to Reddit if it's just going to be an echo chamber for divorce? I didn't have anyone else to talk to. Couldn't confide in friends or family because they would take sides, and it's really not fair on them. And despite how shitty my husband has made me feel these past couple of months, I didn't want his friends to think less of him for his actions. I wanted to know if I was overreacting, if this was something I've blown out of proportion, and if it was, how do I move on? I'm really grateful to everyone for showing me that despite my husband's denial that he was doing anything wrong, things were as bad as I felt. I do want to thank the few Redditors who risked their karma to give me a different perspective, that things could be salvaged if we worked at it. Like most of the comments below, I had considered divorce. But even with divorce, it wouldn't change how worthless and unwanted he made me feel. How he still makes me feel. I want to try to heal before we go down that path. Moving on. I've come to the realization that it's not me who needs therapy, it's my husband. I tried communicating with him once more. I told him I was still deeply unhappy. He said he didn't know where I was coming from, that he thought we had hashed everything out already last time. I showed him this post, a written account of what I experienced and how I felt. His initial reaction was one of anger. I've twisted his words, I've made him out to be the bad guy. How could I share this with strangers? I asked him to show me where I've twisted things. I asked him to show me where I was being unfair. I asked him to tell me who I could have confided in otherwise that wouldn't have damaged his reputation. Things sounded twisted to him because he couldn't answer me honestly the first time round. Things sounded unfair, but it was the reality he tried to escape from. I could have been vengeful, I could have destroyed his reputation, his career prospects, but I still cared enough to protect him from the consequences. We will be separating for a while. It's a bad environment for the baby to be in. This will give him space to reflect on his actions, really figure out why he did what he did. I can't force him to change for the better, I can only hope he wants to. If he chooses to do nothing during this time, then I wish him all the best with someone else. My 30mx30f wants to be back in my life as a friend years later, but I don't think I want anything to do with her. Too long didn't read, I really don't want anything to do with my ex, but I keep getting pressure from mutual friends that I should give her a chance to be back in my life as a friend now that she's changed for the better. I'm glad she's better, but still don't think I want any kind of prolonged relationship with her. Thinking about going North Carolina with a lot of those friends. I'm not sure how else to proceed. Any thoughts/advice would be greatly appreciated. Sorry if this is long. My 30M ex, M30F, and I dated in college for almost 3 years. We broke up because I caught her cheating on me red-handed with a guy in our apartment. I found out she had been cheating on me for at least 6 months. It wasn't entirely unexpected. In that time I did see changes in her. I did suspect cheating in the back of my mind, but I wanted it to be not true bad enough to push those hunches away, I guess. I desperately tried talking with her about us, but she always said it was something else bothering her, stress getting to her, etc., and she talked me out of worrying. I also found out later that said guy introduced her to some hard substances and she eventually began using. She dropped out of school. Found out from a mutual friend that it was because her parents cut her off monetarily and she shacked up with the guy she cheated on me with. I was completely North Carolina with her since the breakup. I was hurt a lot emotionally by everything and ended up struggling through some pretty deep depression and self-doubt. Was honestly the lowest point I've been at. A lot of that stemming from the fact that I was very much in love with M, was even at the point where I was considering proposing after we graduated prior to everything happening and was saving up for a ring. Looking back, it was just a lot of me looking through rose-tinted glasses. Cut to now. I am happily married. My wife, A28F, is amazing. Absolutely the best thing that has ever happened to me. We've been together for 5 years, married 1.5. She's been an incredibly supportive partner, and has helped me combat my self-doubt a lot. Still battle with it sometimes, but I'm in a much better place now compared to 9 years ago. We're also expecting our first child. I've never been happier in my life. Well, about 2 months ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize and they left a message. It was M. The message was essentially her asking me to give her a call so we could talk. Apparently, she got my number off of one of our mutual friends, T. I immediately talked to T. I was very angry at first because T knew exactly what I had been through with that breakup, and she gave M my number no question without even asking me or anything. I found out from T that M had been through rehab for her substance abuse. She had moved back closer to our area, she was trying to mend fences, and that I should hear her out. With that in mind, I decided to give Em a call back. I made up my mind before talking to her that I really didn't want any kind of prolonged contact with her, but I figured if talking to me was somehow part of her recovery process, then I would try and at least talk to her. I also told my wife about everything that's going on. And I had a long talk about it and went over how we both felt about the situation. I told my wife I think I should at least call them, but really didn't want anything more than that, as I wanted to focus on her and our growing family. A was totally understanding. Em and I talked on the phone for a while. She apologized for everything. The cheating, the lies, all of the above. I accepted her apology and said I was glad she was doing better, because I genuinely am. We talked about our lives up to that point a bit. I didn't tell her everything, but she does know I'm married. Toward the end of the conversation, she said she'd eventually like to be friends again and asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee or something. I politely declined, and said that I'm glad she's on the way to healing, but I don't think I want any kind of friendship or relationship with her. We said our goodbyes and hung up. In the time since then, Em has not contacted me, but I've gotten messages and calls from T as well as other people both Em and I know, saying that it's been so long, and that I should try and rebuild some kind of friendship with my ex. I just don't think I want that. I just want to focus on my family, and not dredge anything else up from the past. I've tried to express that to anyone who's talked to me about the situation. Some understand my position, some still persist. I'm honestly just thinking about going full North Carolina Carolina and blocking people who keep trying to push myself and Em together. Any advice on how I could proceed otherwise, or if that is the right choice? Should I give her a chance to be back in my life in some capacity? Edit. Thank you all for your advice and thoughts. I didn't expect all of these responses, but I took time this morning to read through them all. After reading them, as well as talking with my wife about it again, I have decided that I need to stick to my guns and that my original instincts were correct. My plan moving forward is to try and establish clear boundaries one final time with T and anyone else who needs them, and explain one final time exactly why I do not want Em in my life. And I just need to cut out anyone who does not respect that. Again, thank you all for taking time to read and respond to my post. I really appreciate it.